What's up, college football fans? You have found the Lines College Football Podcast for Week 11 in college football. My name is Stephen Andress, joined each and every week on this show by Brett Gibbons, the Lines College Football writer. On this episode, we are going to look at futures, including odds to make the college football playoff after the first number one team in the CFB poll, Tennessee, goes down and handily to Georgia on the road. We will also look at some other games on the Week 11 slate, let you know what Brett is betting in those, what to look out for, and a little bit of upheaval here, Brett, already after that big SEC matchup between Georgia and Tennessee. But not necessarily the end of the road for Tennessee here either.
No, the market is still very, very high in Tennessee. If you look at DraftKings Sportsbook, their prop to make the college football playoff still sits at minus 240.
Wow.
We've seen the precedent laid out by the committee. There actually has been non-division champions that have made the college football playoff. Ohio State in 2016, Alabama the following year. Neither of them won their division that year, but they still made it in. And I think that goes along with their pseudo merit-based when it needs to be, but best teams when they want it to be kind of strategy when ranking these teams. Georgia and Ohio State are the only other two teams that have, better than shorter than even odds, negative odds to make the playoff. That's no surprise. Georgia's a lock, barring just some ridiculous collapse. Even if they lose the SEC championship game to LSU or Ole Miss or whoever it may be, they're definitely still going to be in. And Ohio State, the reason they're so high is because they control their own destiny. As long as they don't lose, they're going to be in. If you look at Tennessee's remaining schedule, they have Missouri, South Carolina, Vanderbilt left. They're most likely not going to play in the SEC championship game after their loss to Georgia. So their odds of winning out are very high. They're going to be double-digit favorites in every single one of those games. I don't anticipate any of those really being all that close. Maybe Missouri. We'll see. But it's interesting because Tennessee is 5. They're not in the top 4. A team that is in the top 4 is TCU. And currently their odds to make the college football playoff are plus 700. They're in the top 4. They have a very clear path to winning a Big 12 championship game and finishing their season undefeated. Teams that are higher than them, UCLA. UCLA already has a loss in their schedule. USC, who has a loss in their schedule. Clemson, after getting their clocks cleaned by Notre Dame. And 2-loss LSU. And I know the LSU thing is they have a little bit more direct path to a conference championship. If LSU wins the SEC championship, they will be the first 2-loss team to make the playoff. But TCU plays at Texas this week. This is a big game. We'll talk about the game later on. But then they have Baylor and Iowa State to close. I don't see a real big spot where TCU will lose. Besides Texas, who do we know from the Big 12 that can even beat TCU? Nobody, because nobody has yet. So I'm not worried about the Big 12 championship. And it's just, maybe this is a hedge against the voters, but the voters put TCU fourth. It proved that our upheaval, our unrest about TCU being excluded and put 7th last week matters, and that the committee heard that. So those are two very interesting teams. I probably wouldn't bet the no side of Tennessee. I think it's plus 195. I probably wouldn't do that just because, again, their odds of winning out are pretty high, and we know that the committee will probably put them in. The big thing is Ohio State and Michigan play each other. They're 2-3. And if it's too lopsided a game, I believe the loser doesn't make the playoff. So that paves the road for Tennessee. That also paves the road for TCU as long as they don't go into Austin and lose this week. And again, we'll talk about it. It's just an interesting market to see the teams that are ahead of TCU.
So I want to play this out real quick before we move on to the Week 11 slate here, because I think there's a better betting strategy if you want to bet TCU to win the playoff as opposed to just taking this plus 700 to make the playoff, I should say. So Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan winner, and who's the other team I'm blanking on?
I would say Tennessee.
Yeah. So, all right. So you have two pretty much locked in there, Georgia, Ohio State. Tennessee, if it's 1 loss and the SEC champ is 2-loss Bama or 2-loss LSU, then they're probably not getting in because Tennessee beat both of those teams and their only loss is to Georgia. So if you believe that TCU can get in, first of all, my question to you is, can they get in with one loss, TCU?
No.
I'm not sure they can. So we're aligned that the only way TCU gets in is if they're undefeated, correct?
Yeah.
So you could bet plus 700 for them to make the playoff. Or if you believe TCU is going to go undefeated, you can get better odds, in my opinion, just betting them on the money line each week, rest of the way. They're plus 225 underdogs against Texas this week. The following week, they're going to be probably plus money, slight plus money at Baylor, I would think. Maybe a little less than even money at best if we're being generous here. That's not an easy game. And then they're probably going to be pretty decent favorites against Iowa State the final game. And then you have one more game in the Big 12 championship game, correct? So
yeah,
that's at best probably going to be a situation where they're not going to be heavy favorites in the Big 12 title game. So if you were to just bet them on the money line each week, you're going to get a much better payout through 4 games than you would at 7-1 for them right now to make the college football playoff. So I'm just saying mathematically, that's the better way to bet TCU here to make the playoff as opposed to just taking the plus 700 on them to make the playoff. Now, those odds theoretically bake in a chance for them to make the playoff with one loss, but Brett, you and I are agreed that they're not making the playoff with one loss with the other teams that are out there.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really interesting strategy. Definitely play that back to everyone listening. Go back and listen to that again, because that's very interesting. Yeah, there's no chance. The committee has already kind of told us that TCU is operating on a razor thin margin. I mean, their resume is better than Ohio State's. So if we're doing resume merit based or most deserving, TCU should be number 2. But the committee has already said, we're not going to include you before. Okay, fine, you yelled at us, fine, we'll include them 4 here. Happy? So I think if they drop the game at Texas, even if it's a double overtime, last second field goal shootout and they go on to win the Big 12 championship, barring some crazy upset of Tennessee or Michigan and Ohio State, just any of that, I can't imagine that they're going to get in anything short of undefeated Big 12 champions.
So last question here before we move on to the slate.
Yeah.
If TCU does lose a game, and we're looking at Georgia, Ohio State, and one-loss Tennessee as 3 of the 4 teams, then who do you see as the 4th team in your mind? Is it a one-loss Michigan who lost to Ohio State? Is it a one-loss Pac-12 champion? Who in your eyes is it a 2-loss SEC team? And we have 3 SEC teams in the college football playoff. I mean, the whole country would be just shouting at their TVs if that happens. But what is the most likely scenario here for you? If our given is Georgia, Ohio State, and Tennessee hold their form the rest of the way, who's that 4th team if TCU has one loss?
Well, I don't think it'll be the SEC team just because the committee, whether they'll admit it or not, does have it in mind, the national repercussions of what would happen if they had a 3-team playoff, controversially. It just depends on the resume. Like it's tough to say.
It's a tough question.
Yeah, like the Pac-12 team, maybe. It depends. If Michigan gets blown out by Ohio State, which I don't think will happen. If they lose by 20, it won't be Michigan. If it's a 3-point game and it's a great game, high ratings, why wouldn't you have the run it back with Ohio State and Michigan playing each other?
I would tend to agree with that, and it's going to be a really interesting debate if it's one-loss Michigan who only lost to Ohio State, or it's one-loss Oregon as a conference champion whose only loss was week 1 to Georgia, even though they got their doors kicked in 49-3. So, but I'm not sure Oregon's going to go unbeaten. They're going to have to play Utah. It will be at Autzen, but I'm not sure Oregon's going to beat Utah and USC in the Pac-12 title game. But if they do, then they're clearly deserving, in my opinion, over a one-loss TCU. So I think the path is there for multiple teams in the Pac-12 over a one-loss TCU. And then you said it last week. We have no idea what criteria the committee's using here. It's like every year they make up a different set of criteria here. So deciphering who of those one-loss teams is going to get in is a really interesting discussion. But I guess I would lean towards the one-loss Pac-12 champion in this case.
If it's Oregon, definitely, yeah. That's a good point you have, and it's shown that that game against Georgia, on the road across country, brand new head coach, brand new quarterback, all those things that if you ran the game back today, it probably wouldn't be 49-3. And I think the committee recognizes that. So yeah, you talked me into, I think I would probably lean Oregon in that. A quick fun note though about that Oregon Georgia game. They had the same EPA per play margin over Oregon that Georgia did over Tennessee before the rain started falling. So even though it didn't show on the scoreboard, I have to shout out at Stats of War on Twitter for that one, for that bite. Even though it didn't show in the final scoreboard, the metrics say that the first half of that Georgia-Tennessee game was as lopsided as the Georgia-Oregon game. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, and one last note, Oregon and USC have not played each other this year. So if they play in the Pac-12 title game, that right. I think that is a spot where it becomes winner into the playoff if they both have one loss. So it's fascinating. It's the best part about the college football season is trying to figure out who's going to play in this thing. And there certainly are some juicy odds out there if you can if you can decode the committee each and every year. That is for sure. All right, let's get into the college football slate here. We are going to look at games on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We are still in the midst of 27 consecutive days of football, and we begin on Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern time. This one on CBS Sports Network. Kent State at Bowling Green, 7 p.m. kickoff, as I mentioned, 55.5 total. Kent State, a 2.5-point road favorite here after you went to their friendly confines a week ago, Brett. So how do you like this one?
Is there a little bit of bias in this one? Why I put it on there? Of course there is. I had to talk about Bowling Green at some point this year. This is a really interesting game, probably the best action game on the Wednesday slate. You got Buffalo, Central Michigan, and NIU, Western Michigan. Let's talk about Kent State's top receiver, Dante Cephas. He didn't play last game, and visibly the offense just could not get it going without him. You could tell that Colin Schley didn't have anybody downfield that he could go to, but I haven't heard anything about it because it's incredibly difficult to find injury updates on MAC players, but it kind of points to that he's playing this week, and that's fine. So the Kent State offense should have a bigger rebound this week than they did over last week. But Kent State also plays up and down to their competition. So an example, you look at when they played Georgia and when they played Toledo, they scored a lot of points and they lost close. But then they played Miami, Ohio, and Ball State, where they didn't score a lot of points, and they also lost close. So it's kind of a team that plays to their opponent. If you look at Bowling Green, they're on a 3-game win streak. They have a very good defense. I believe in all-American caliber middle linebacker in Darren Anders, and they also have a terrific defensive lineman, Carl Brooks, who is, I believe, second in the nation in sacks right now, which is great. They have a similar defensive havoc rating to Clemson and Cincinnati. Just putting that out there. I know that it's a different set of opponents that they're playing, different competition, but the numbers aren't lying there that they're a very good defense. They are good enough to slow Kent State's offense down. Let's just put that out there. They just are. We've seen in wins this year, in their last 3 wins, Bowling Green is allowing 13.3 points per game and 19.8 points per game in all of their wins. That includes an overtime win against Marshall and another win earlier in the season. In losses, they're allowing almost 47 points per game. And that's tough because they played at Mississippi State. They played UCLA, and then they allowed 59 points to Eastern Kentucky in like 55 overtimes. Their only MAC loss this year, they allowed 38 points to Buffalo. But it's not a surprise to hear that, when they win, they allow fewer points than when they lose. But when you look at the margins in when they win and when they lose, it's very clearly they win on defense and they lose when their defense doesn't show up. Kent State doesn't feel the defense. We know this. They're one of the worst metrically in the entire nation. But Bowling Green's offense really isn't good. They're not a threat to kind of push the ball downfield. They're 119th in overall EPA per play, 127th in rushing, 107th in yards per play. Quarterback Matt McDonald has cut down severely on the turnovers, but he's still not an inspiring quarterback, and he might have the worst throwing motion in the country. It makes my shoulder hurt just watching him. So because we have a good defense and a not as good offense, we're basically playing 2 half teams here. I'm looking to play under 55.5. I think Bowling Green in the Doit in Bowling Green, Ohio can slow down Kent State just enough to where Kent State's not going to be scoring 35, 40 points. And I don't believe Bowling Green is going to be matching either of those numbers either.
Thursday night football in the college ranks. Tulsa at Memphis. This one at 7:30 kickoff on ESPN. Memphis a 6.5 point favorite, total of 61.5 in this one. A lot of points expected again for this. And Tulsa is without their defensive coordinator. Is that what I'm seeing here, Brett?
So they had everyone pulled away this offseason. Everyone got hired away. Joseph Gillespie is terrific defensive coordinator. He got hired by Sonny Dykes at TCU, whose defense has struggled but improved from last year. And from with Gillespie to without Gillespie, Tulsa's gone from a scrappy team that's an upset waiting to happen to just completely non-competitive. They're kind of hard to watch this year. They're one of the worst rushing defenses in the country. Again, that goes to show that Gillespie really is a terrific coordinator, and they're really severely missing him. They're 120th in yards per rush allowed, over 5.5. It's ridiculous. Their wins this year: Temple, Jacksonville State, who's in the FCS, and Northern Illinois, who might be the worst team in the MAC right now. Tulsa does have a pretty good quarterback, though. Davis Brin, he has 17 passing touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Just an overall solid quarterback. Not a high completion percentage, but he propels them to wins. And Memphis's defense is just terrible against the pass, which is great. They're 93rd in opposing passer rating allowed. Memphis, they win games that they should. They also lose games that they should. They don't really have an upset, but they don't really have a terrific win under their belts. They've lost 4 in a row, but here's the thing. They've lost to Houston by 1, who I know Houston isn't playing great football, but they're a decent team. They lost to East Carolina, who's one of the biggest surprises of the year. They lost in overtime. They lost to a top 20 Tulane team, only by 10 points on the road. And they lost to UCF by a touchdown, and UCF is playing, I believe, the best football in the group of 5. We'll talk about that soon, too. The aggregate ratings like Memphis, minus 9.5. So I'm probably going to be pulling Memphis as long as they stay under a touchdown. I saw some steam on 6.5 this morning at FanDuel, I believe it was. And FanDuel is one of the sharper college football books. So I'm pretty confident in saying that Memphis is a decent enough team, and Tulsa is a very bad team. Memphis is playing at home. I like Memphis as long as they stay under a touchdown here.
Friday night in college football, 8 o'clock kickoff on ESPN2. East Carolina at Cincinnati. The Bearcats are a 5-point favorite in this AAC showdown. Total of 52.5. Forget about the high school football. We got some college football action under the Friday night lights. Brett, what do you like about this one?
This is a big game. And I wouldn't have thought about that being such a huge game earlier in the year, but really these two teams are still in the hunt for the conference title. And so this is kind of a loser leaves town game, not quite to the same extent, but the loser of this game is probably out of the AAC race. So the number's also all over the place. As of Wednesday morning, it was 5.5 at DraftKings, 4.5 at BetMGM, -5, but even money at Caesars. It's just kind of all over the place. At DraftKings, it did hit 6.5 earlier this week, but then East Carolina had some buyback. Cincinnati, they're not as good as last year. We know that. That's obvious. But they're still a very good team. They lost to Arkansas in week 1, and then they lost to UCF 2 weeks later. End of list. 2 very good teams that they lost to. And again, Arkansas was playing a lot better football in week 1 than they are now. They do also have probably my favorite defensive player in the country, Ivan Pace Jr. He should be an All-American. If he's not, it's a total snub. Just a complete beast through. He's athletic. He hits hard. A sure tackler. He's good in the passing game. And I think he's probably the best player on Cincinnati's entire roster. But the biggest issue with Cincinnati is on offense that they can't run the football. They haven't been able to. They can't run against anybody. They're like 120th in rushing success rate, rushing efficiency. It's kind of a tough watch. But they do have a very good passing game, and that's with quarterback Ben Bryant, who transferred in, and then Tyler Scott, who we've talked about him on the show before, electric receiver, takes the top off of defenses. East Carolina stacks up pretty well against the run, but they're really bad against the pass. They're 117th in passer rating allowed, and I think that's why you see Cincinnati favored in this one by as much as they are. So I think Cincinnati's going to be able to move the ball through the air. They just abandon the run. Just don't even try. I don't want to have to deal with that watching that. And with East Carolina, all the talk is around their quarterback, Holden Ahlers, but the talk should be around running back Keaton Mitchell. He was a 1,000-yard rusher last year. He's electric. He is the best player, I think, on this field on offense. And East Carolina is coming off a bye. Now, all that said, you're playing in Nippert Stadium at night. It's on primetime. It's on national TV. Cincinnati is ready to play. So as long as Cincinnati stays under a touchdown, I don't love these kind of dead zone spreads. I don't like when it's -4.5, -5, -5.5. It's more exciting to me when they're pushed up against those key figures of 3, 7, even 6 to a degree. But as long as it stays under a touchdown, I think I lean Cincinnati in this game.
Let's move on to the Saturday slate of college football. We have a half dozen games to get through here, and we'll start with the noon kickoff window on ESPN. LSU off of the amazing, dramatic 2-point conversion win in overtime over Alabama in Death Valley at night. Our own Matt Brown was there. Can't wait to talk to him on the Megapod about what that experience was like. Awesome stuff from what we saw on TV. But this week they go on the road. LSU, a 3-point road favorite against Arkansas. Over-under of 64 in this one. And off of such a big dramatic win that puts them back into the SEC title game conversation, they have to stay focused here this week, Brett.
Yeah, and that's not easy at 11 a.m. In Razorback Stadium. I've been to Razorback Stadium for an 11 a.m. kickoff. And if things don't go right at first, there's really no juice, no atmosphere. I'm going to go off the rails here from the betting, but Razorback Stadium is set up in a way that makes it difficult for people to get into the stadium. They have small gates and they have few gates. So these lines get really long, gets backed up. That means late arriving crowds. And that's actually seriously important for a team that needs to get on it off the bat. I actually think it hurts LSU a little bit more because this is a major letdown spot. It's probably going to be a late arriving crowd. It's probably going to be a pretty sleepy crowd at 11 a.m. Even though LSU is a big opponent, Arkansas is coming off of that loss against Liberty, and that really takes the wind out of the sails of the fans. I don't like this for LSU. And if I don't like this for LSU, LSU fans shouldn't like this for LSU. This is a terrible, terrible spot. Jaden Daniels, in his career, I obviously played at Arizona State, but he rarely plays in cold weather. And this is going to be a very cold kickoff. The highs are only going to be around 30, maybe 35 at the highest during this game. And Jaden Daniels has played exactly 2 games in his career when the temperature has been under 40. That was both at Oregon State, and he lost both of those games. Not that that's a trend you can take and project in here, but it's just an interesting note. A lot of the sharp plays are on Arkansas in this one. +3, +2.5. The line did move a little bit to LSU, probably because there's enough people saying, well, they're a much improved team, which is true. That's how Brian Kelly kind of conducts his teams. They improve as the season goes on. I hate this situationally. I wouldn't touch the side with a 40-foot pole, and I would not be surprised to, and you be careful with my words, see LSU lose.
Are you telling me that the Arkansas crowd is too busy having their brunch mimosas in the parking lot to get in for an 11 a.m. kickoff? Is that what you're trying to tell me here?
It does have to do with the fact that they are at the tailgates and that it takes a minute to get in, but it seriously, I was told, I got in the stadium early. I was told to get in the stadium at least an hour early to kickoff because those crowds will just bunch up. There's only 4 or 5 entrances, and they're really small entrances. And so this crowd, this stadium will not be full at kickoff. It might fill up as time goes on, especially not the student section. But yeah, it's going to be quiet to start the game, and a quiet start. It's going to be a cold morning. Takes a minute to get those muscles warmed up, get in the groove of things. This could be one of those games where LSU lets Arkansas hang around. And I hate teams that let teams hang around. It's my number one. Do not let teams hang around, especially home teams. Bad, worse home teams. Do not let them hang around, because if you do, they're going to bite you at the end and you're going to lose games.
Let's move to the 3:30 kickoff window here Eastern time on Saturday. This one on ESPN2, UCF at Tulane. Tulane is a 2-point home favorite, total of 54 in this one. And with such a big slate of college football games, Brett, I know it's not as juicy as it was last week, but when you circle UCF Tulane out of all the other games that everybody's going to be watching on Saturday, there must be something specific that you like in this game.
Well, it's because they're two ranked teams, and this is for the battle of the AAC right now. The winner of this is in control of it, and Tulane has been playing terrific football. The only loss that they have this year is in a severe letdown spot after they upset Kansas State. Otherwise, they've been playing rock solid, and the rankings are reflecting that. They're in the top 20 now. That's great. This probably should have been where game day could have gone, but they didn't, but that's fine. It's game day in our hearts. Power ratings actually favor UCF by 1.6 on the road, which is interesting considering Tulane is favored by 2. And the reasons that the power ratings like UCF is because they're excellent. They've been playing great football lately. They're actually the number 1 red zone defense. They're only allowing scores, touchdowns, or field goals on 61.8% of trips, less than 62%. So that means almost 38% of the time, over 38% of the time, teams are coming away with 0 points in the red zone against UCF. And that's a big deal. I think that, I like to look at red zone scoring. I like to look at red zone defense and third downs. So shifting over to third down, Tulane is a very good third down team on defense. They're allowing, I think they're 40th in the nation in opposing conversion rate, but UCF is a top 20 team when converting third down. So already we're looking at UCF, excellent in red zone defense and excellent converting third downs. Those are 2 things I like to look for in winners. And UCF has just kind of shown me a little bit more this season. When they lose, it's because John Rice Plumlee is turning the ball over at an exceptionally high rate. And Tulane doesn't really force a ton of turnovers, and they've had a lot of turnover luck. They're recovering an above average number of fumbles, and they're forcing interceptions, which is pretty skill-based, but, does fall on the quarterback's shoulders a bit, a much more above average interception rate. So turnover luck, just kind of a rock solid UCF team here. Excellent quarterbacks don't really hurt UCF. They've played against a bunch of them, and Tulane does field Michael Pratt, who's excellent, but usually those excellent quarterbacks aren't the ones that are beating UCF. It's usually UCF beating themselves. That's an option that could happen in this game, but I don't know if I'd factor the fact that UCF could or could not beat themselves into handicapping this game. And Yulman Stadium, it's one of the newer ones in the FBS that's home to Tulane. One of the smaller ones. It's not really a daunting atmosphere. I think it sits about 30,000. I've been there. It's just not the biggest. It's not Death Valley. UCF plays in much tougher spots. Their own stadium themselves is a much tougher spot to play than Yulman Stadium. So I think I'm looking for UCF outright, and DraftKings has plus EV on their money line at plus 115. If you do the conversion, 2.5 points comes out to about 112 on the money line. So if you're looking at a 115, I'm comfortable pulling that. I like UCF here. Tulane's fun. I think the run's over.
Still in the 3:30 p.m. kickoff window Eastern time. This one on FS1 in the Big Ten. Wisconsin at Iowa. Wisconsin, a 1.5 point road favorite. I just looked at the total and I am dumbfounded because here we are again in an Iowa game with a total of 35. 35, Brett. Why are we watching this game? Why are we betting this game?
Why am I driving 8 hours to watch this game in person?
Well, watch paint dry on the wall, man. What are we doing here?
I actually put a poll out on social media, and it is a legitimate which one is going to be higher number. Kind of a joke, but kind of not. The point total or the temperature that day, because it's only going to be in the mid. It's only going to be in the mid 30s. I will be there. I'm actually really looking forward to it. It's probably going to be miserable, but. I was asked if I lost a bet on the Discord server to go to this game, but yeah, it's fine.
They have good drinks in the parking lot, I'm sure.
You know what? These 2 teams are actually trending in decent directions, and I say that knowing what Iowa puts out on the field. Hear me out here. They're 99th in offensive SP+. That's not good, but they were bottom 5 for a majority of the year, so they are improving. I know it's against Northwestern. I know it's against Purdue. But they're scoring points, not at an exceptionally high rate, but they're scoring more points than they were. It's not as laughably bad. Now, Brian Ferentz should be fired, should be gone. He is not a good coordinator whatsoever. Spencer Petras, garbage. Just this offense is garbage. But they're doing better than they were, and that's important to note. Wisconsin, 54th in offensive SP+. We kind of joke about this Wisconsin offense, and no, they're fine. They're not great, but they're fine. I don't trust Graham Mertz, but they're okay. And that's why I kind of like the over in this game.
Well, how could you not? It's only 35 for God's sake.
I know, but I've done well betting against these absurdly low totals with Iowa because they don't hit any. We talked about the Cyhawk game in week 2, and it had a point total of like 36, and it went way under.
Yeah.
Aggregate power ratings, think these teams are about even. It favors Iowa by less than half a point at home. I kind of understand that. Kinnick's a great place to play. Wisconsin is a rival. This is a blackout. It's sold out, 2:30 kickoff Central. So it's going to be a good crowd. It's going to be a juice crowd, good home field advantage there. So that's interesting to note. Am I betting Iowa with the points? No, absolutely not. I don't trust anything that they do. But I kind of want to look at the total. Just to back up why I'm betting over 35 is because there's been some movement on this total between about 36.5 and 35.5 down to 35. And every time it hits 35, it gets buyback. So I'm going to be a part of that buyback when it hits the 35, buy it kind of at the low watermark. I am going to take over 35. And when this game finishes with 16 total scored points, I'm going to look back and be like, that was so stupid.
Yeah, well, I agree with you that when the total is this low, every point matters. So again, betting best practices here. Don't just take the 35.5 if that's what your book has. Go to another book that has the 35, and if you don't have an account, open it up. You'll get an awesome sign-up bonus at thelines.com if you just go to the college football page and find the best total on this one under the column that you want and click on the button. You'll get maybe even a free bet here.
I was going to say, yeah, you could use a free bet.
Yeah, totally, because it would not shock me in the least if the total score, the final score of this game is 19-16 and we have 35 points in this game.
Yeah, which is also important because 35 is a square multiple of 7, so it's kind of a key figure in amongst itself. I mean, it's more of a commonly landed upon, 21-14. It's more commonly landed upon total than say 32, 33, 36. So yeah, even that half point movement off of that. Yeah. So even the 35 and a half, even the half point off that. Yeah, absolutely. Don't settle for it. Find that 35. I found it at Caesars.
All right, let's move on to a game that has a total almost double that of Wisconsin and Iowa. We are in the Big 12 now, 7 p.m. kickoff on ESPN on Saturday. TCU at Texas. Texas, a 7-point home favorite in this one, over-under of 65. We talked about this a little bit earlier with TCU's playoff chances, Brett, but if they want to make the playoff, this is the big upset they're going to have to pull.
Yes, the aggregate power ratings like Texas by 5.5, 5.7 points, which is less than that 7. And again, 7's a key betting figure, so that's important. We've seen what Texas can play like against their big opponents. We've seen them step up to the plate against Alabama, specifically defensively. Note, Alabama did kind of beat themselves in that game with a ton of penalties, but then they also blew the doors off of Oklahoma. And I know Oklahoma's not that good a football team, and they were playing terrible football at the time, but that is one of the biggest rivalries in college football. So we see what Texas can come to the plate with. Now, after that Oklahoma game, I have to give a shout out to Shehan Jayaraja, I believe it is. I'm so sorry. I definitely botched the pronunciation of his name on Twitter. Quinn Ewers, since playing in the Red River Shootout, less than 51% completion and 6.5 yards per attempt. He is not playing very well at the moment. Looking at the schedule he played against, it wasn't a particularly scary schedule. Played just horribly against Oklahoma State, whose defense has regressed a lot. So I don't know if I'm looking at this Texas offense in the same light as I would in that Oklahoma game, or even Alabama, where Ewers showed flashes before getting hurt and not playing most of that. An injury for TCU, Quentin Johnston, sorry about that. Prolific wide receiver, one of the best in the country, projected first-round draft pick right now in the latest mocks. He returned to practice, but it is worth noting that he missed most of last week with an ankle injury, an ankle sprain. So even if he comes back, he may not be playing at 100%. And that's important because he's the one that just shreds defenses deep. Just an incredible downfield threat. TCU, we don't talk about their defense a whole lot, at least not in a good light, but they do have Travius Hodges-Tomlinson, who's a very good corner. He can match up pretty well with the Xavier Worthies, the Jordan Whittingtons, but the problem is they only have one Hodges-Tomlinson. They don't have two, but they need two to defend both Xavier Worthy and Jordan Whittington. Now, the bind is, once you do get on those guys, you have to deal with Bijan Robinson, who ran for over 200 yards on TCU last year, albeit a significantly worse run defense. But I'm still not really inspired by their defensive front. I'm just not. So I think Bijan Robinson is going to find some success here. Even if Quinn Ewers isn't playing all that well, they can kind of rely on him. It's just a fun note. I wouldn't use it as a betting trend whatsoever, but TCU is 7-1 when they play in a game featured by College Game Day, which is the best in the FBS. Just an interesting note. Again, don't take that with you. But TCU, they have something to play for. We mentioned it. This is the biggest game of their season. If they want to remain in the college football playoff conversation, if they want to win a Big 12 title, which would be an incredible turnaround from last year, if they want to finish undefeated, which is in the cards now, they have to win this game. And I don't think Texas is a team that steps up to the plate to spoil the other team's party. They play when they have a big blockbuster team in town. And TCU is a top 4 team. And these teams have played forever. It's a big rivalry. But I don't believe that TCU coming to town carries the same weight as Alabama or when they play Oklahoma. It's just a matter of the brand. And Texas does focus on that as much as they will tell you that they don't. They do care about the helmets on the other sideline. So I'm going to take TCU +7. I haven't seen a lot of movement around this, which kind of sucks, but you can find TCU 7 anywhere. Again, they have something to play for. And even if they don't win this game outright, I don't think that they're going to lose by more than a touchdown.
And I'll just echo that if you think they're a live dog in this one, and this is the toughest game left on the regular season schedule, then I would suggest betting the money line here. +225 is the best available as we record on Wednesday morning, and roll that over each game. And you're going to get better than 7-1 on them to make the college football playoff. So if we look at the Big 12 standings here, Brett, who's their most likely opponent? If they win this game, who's their most likely opponent in the Big 12 title game here, do you think?
It's so hard because it's just fallen off a cliff lately because it was Kansas State, but Adrian Martinez has been in and out of the lineup, and they've lost a couple of games. Here's Texas, but am I going to sit here and tell you that Texas is going to play in the Big 12 title game? No. Oklahoma State's fallen off since Spencer Sanders got hurt.
Yeah, that's what's interesting, because if TCU does win out, that means by definition they're going to hand Texas a third conference loss. They're going to hand Baylor a third conference loss. So I guess we're looking at Kansas State potentially in
or drop the state and say Kansas. Do we drop the state and say Kansas? I hope so. It's not going to be.
Man.
I hope so.
Can you imagine the Kansas Jayhawks in a Big 12 title game? Exactly what the Big 12 was hoping for when they instituted a Big 12 title game.
Well, they are undefeated when Jalen Daniels plays, but they have a route. I'm not going to say that they're going to win, but they have a route because they play both Texas and Kansas State, who are the only two teams above them. Baylor's going to play TCU. Yeah. Although, you know what? Baylor has a tiebreaker over Kansas. That's important. So
I guess winner of this Baylor-Kansas State game this week is in the driver's seat to get to the Big 12 title game.
Yeah.
Unless Texas wins this week. And then I think Texas.
Then it'll probably be a Texas-TCU rematch.
Yeah, then we might be looking at a rematch here. So
interesting. But like I said earlier, with the TCU route to the playoff, Baylor and Kansas State don't overly scare me with TCU. And we'll find out with TCU and Baylor here in 2 weeks. And we already found out with TCU and Kansas State.
Yeah. Texas has the head-to-head over Kansas State. Their final game of the regular season is home against Baylor. So a lot of head-to-head tiebreakers here still in play.
Yes.
Might have a three-way tiebreaker where no head-to-head solves it. So we'll have to figure out what happens after that. Still a lot of games left to be played here, but obviously TCU has everything they want right in front of them in terms of both Big 12 title hopes and also the college football playoff. All right, let's go to the after dark window, I'll call it. And it's not the Pac-12, but it is out west. San Jose State at San Diego State, a 10:30 p.m. kickoff on FS1. San Jose State, a 2.5-point road favorite with a total of 41.5 in this one. As we mentioned before, Brett, not as appealing of an overall slate in college football as last week, but again, you must see something in this one that has piqued your interest.
Yeah, I was debating between putting Alabama at Ole Miss or Washington, Oregon here. Nah, San Jose State at San Diego State. Team me up for this. FS1 action after dark. If you stay up for this one, good for you. I probably won't just because it's so freaking late, but I do like San Jose State in this game. Now, San Diego State, they're 122nd offensive SP plus and points scored per drive. They're abysmal. They got by last year because they had a really terrific defense, but then they lost a very good linebacker and a very good edge rusher from that team, and they're just not quite where they were last year. And they're also not beating teams like they probably should. They beat Hawaii by 2 because they only scored 16 points on the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors defense, worst in the country by a wide margin. It is worth noting, though, that San Diego State is 4-1 at home, and their only loss was to Arizona, who I know Arizona's not great, but it is a Pac-12 team. And it was the first game of the year. So they're on a 4-game home winning streak. San Jose State, though, they're just marginally better on both offense and defense. They're playing better football lately than San Diego State has been. This number is starting to become juiced at FanDuel and DraftKings, and because it's under field goal, that does matter. I'll make it quick. I'm betting San Jose State minus 2.5. I just like them in this spot a lot more. I think they're the better football team.
Any other final thoughts here before we wrap up here? We are in the after dark window, so
yes.
Anything in the Pac-12 that stands out to you?
Yes, and it's not a bet. I just want to throw it out there that Arizona at UCLA carries a 77.5 point total. That's it. That's the only mark.
That's a big number.
That is a silly big number. 77.5 points.
So
does either team field
over,
11
right?
defenders? I feel like I have to. But the thing is like I don't have the gut to be able to go in here and bet this under because I could realistically see this being a 50-30 final. Like it's just it's absurd that there's a 77.5 point total, and that's why I love college football.
Final thought for me, we were talking about tiebreaker scenarios for the Big 12 title game. If we wound up having 3 teams with the same number of conference losses there behind TCU, and obviously head to head is first. If one team has beaten the other 2, then they get in. But if round robin doesn't cover it, then we get in a situation where those 3 teams will be compared against the remaining teams in the conference standings from top to bottom. So you take out the teams that are tied and you look at their record against the rest of the conference, essentially, to try and do it. And if that somehow still doesn't solve it, then you're looking at scoring differential among the tied teams, the team or teams with the lowest differential between points scored and points allowed in games versus the tied teams.
Oh my God.
Is eliminated from consideration. Now we're getting into like World Cup goal differential tiebreakers here. So hopefully head-to-heads or at least head-to-head against the rest of the conference schedule solves it. But that's like how deep you can go here, where you're looking at how much did you beat the other teams that you're tied with to settle who might be the second team in the Big 12 title game. So a lot of football left to be played, including between these teams that are currently tied with 2 losses in the Big 12. But I thought it was at least interesting to note that so everybody has an understanding if you're looking at Big 12 futures as well. That's going to do it for this week's show. Thanks for watching, everybody. We enjoy doing this every week. If you enjoy the content, be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. Let us know in the comments if you're watching on YouTube who you are betting on this week in college football. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, be sure to leave us a 5-star review. It does us a lot of good. Try and get a few more people each week that can see this podcast and benefit from it. So thanks so much. We appreciate it. Best of luck with your college football bets here in week number 11.